If every animal on Earth woke up tomorrow able to speak human language, most of them would probably ignore us entirely. A deer would talk about grass. A crow would talk about shiny objects and grudges held against specific people, the same faces it's been scolding for years. But a handful of species wouldn't just have complaints. They would walk into that conversation with centuries of documented grievances, ready to press charges, receipts already in hand. So, if animals could talk, which one would carry the deepest, most legitimate hatred for humanity? The answer isn't a lion or a shark. Apex predators barely register us as a category worth tracking until we wander into their territory uninvited. And even then, most of them would rather avoid the confrontation entirely. The real candidates are stranger and sadder than that. Species whose entire genetics, geography, or population got rewritten by human hands on purpose for our convenience with no vote taken and no consent asked. Start with the pigeon, because its grievance runs on betrayal rather than fear. Humans domesticated the rock dove more than 5,000 years ago, among the oldest livestock relationships on the planet, older, by most estimates, than our relationship with the chicken. We built dedicated towers just to house them, some in Iran and Egypt tall enough for thousands of nesting pairs. And in parts of medieval England, the right to even build one was legally reserved for lords of the manor. We bred them for meat, for messages, for racing, and we praised them constantly for the one skill no other animal on Earth could match: navigating home across hundreds of miles using senses we still don't fully understand. During the First World War, the US Army Signal Corps leaned on roughly 600 pigeons in active service because trench radio kept failing under shell fire and mud. As many as 500,000 pigeons served across that single war on all sides combined. One of them, Cher Ami, flew 25 miles through German gunfire in October 1918, shot through the chest and blinded in one eye, carrying a message that saved nearly 200 trapped American soldiers known as the Lost Battalion. France gave him a medal. He's still mounted in the Smithsonian, one of the most decorated animals in American military history. Then, radio got cheap and reliable, and an entire branch of communication that had depended on pigeons for millennia stopped needing them within a generation. Coops emptied. Keepers walked away. Millions of domesticated birds got released or simply escaped into cities already shaped like the cliffs their wild ancestors nested on. No invasion required, just an open door nobody bothered closing behind them. The same species that carried a war hero's medal now gets poisoned off ledges by the very civilization it once served, treated as an infestation rather than the discharged veteran of an industry we built and then dismantled. A pigeon's grievance has nothing to do with fear or persecution. It comes down to dependency, engineered by us, and then abandoned the moment it stopped being useful, capped off with the insult of being called a flying rat on the way out. Next, the factory-farmed chicken, whose grievance runs stranger and darker than abandonment. This one lives inside the animal's own body. The wild jungle fowl that gave rise to every chicken on Earth is a fast, wary, strong-flying bird built for the forests of South and Southeast Asia, able to sprint and take to the air the instant a predator appears, spending most of its life in near-constant motion. In 1925, it took roughly 16 weeks of feeding to raise a chicken to 2.5 pounds. Selective breeding has pushed that same weight gain down to under 7 weeks today, a growth rate increase of more than 300% in daily gain. Breast muscle mass exploded to feed consumer demand for white meat, and skeletons never evolved to catch up, leaving many broilers with legs too weak to reliably support their own bodies, a documented welfare problem called tibial dyschondroplasia that shows up across the industry at a genetically predictable rate. Some birds develop a condition industry researchers call wooden breast, where the overgrown muscle tissue itself turns dense and fibrous, a direct physical cost of breeding for size over structural integrity. Somewhere between 70 and 74 billion of these birds get raised and slaughtered worldwide every single year, a population that outnumbers every human on the planet by roughly 10 to 1 at any given moment, almost none of them living anything resembling the life their wild ancestor lived. A chicken's grievance would run existential rather than personal, a single betrayal stretched across an entire species instead of one bad war. We didn't just take something from this animal. We rewrote its blueprint before it ever hatched, then multiplied that blueprint into the tens of billions. Generation after generation, each one born already carrying the same structural debt as the last. Notice the shape these first two grievances take. The pigeon lost a job and a home. The chicken lost the ability to trust its own body. Both are forms of industrial exploitation, but they land on completely different parts of the animal, one external and one written straight into the genome before birth. And then there's the mosquito, whose grievance runs in the opposite direction entirely, because for once, humans are the ones holding the actual weapon. Mosquito-borne diseases, malaria chief among them, kill somewhere between 600,000 and a million people worldwide every year. And public health researchers routinely describe the mosquito's total historical death toll as exceeding every war in recorded history combined. Bill Gates has called it the deadliest animal on the planet by a wide margin, ahead of snakes, dogs, and every large predator combined by orders of magnitude. A ranking that surprises most people the first time they see the actual numbers laid out side by side. From a mosquito's perspective, none of that reads as malice. A female mosquito bites because she needs a blood meal to develop her eggs, the same evolutionary imperative driving nearly every animal that's ever hunted for food, running on instinct with zero concept of the disease riding along in her saliva. Humanity's response has moved well past bug spray and mosquito nets. In 2016, a team led by Andrea Crisanti at Imperial College London built a CRISPR-based gene drive targeting a gene called double sex in Anopheles gambiae, the primary malaria-carrying mosquito species across sub-Saharan Africa. The edit spreads to nearly every offspring instead of the usual 50%, overriding ordinary inheritance entirely, a trick that lets a single genetic change sweep through an entire wild population within a handful of generations. In large caged population trials, that gene drive collapsed the target population completely within about a year, with no viable females left to keep the line going. Traditional pest control never worked at this level. This is a genetic tool engineered specifically to erase a species' ability to reproduce at all, deployed because that species keeps killing us in numbers no other animal comes close to matching. Field trials for eventual wild release already under discussion in multiple African nations. A mosquito has no comprehension of any of this, no awareness that the itch it causes today gets answered, somewhere in a lab thousands of miles away, with a war being waged directly against its DNA. Even researchers building these tools describe the moral weight of it openly. Deliberately engineering a species toward extinction, even a species responsible for more human death than any other animal on the planet, sits in genuinely uncharted ethical territory. And scientists working on gene drives have spent years debating containment, reversibility, and unintended ecological consequences before any release into the wild moves forward. The scale of the intention is what makes the mosquito's case different from the other two, a species targeted directly, on purpose, for erasure rather than harmed as a byproduct of some other goal. Line the three up and a real pattern shows up underneath all of it. And it has nothing to do with size, danger, or how much any of these animals actually think about us day to day. The pigeon's grievance is dependency, engineered by us and then abandoned by us the moment it stopped being useful. The chicken's grievance is identity, a body redesigned so completely that the animal's own skeleton can no longer support the meat we bred onto it. The mosquito's grievance is existence itself, the only species on this list facing a tool built with the explicit stated goal of erasing it entirely, not as collateral damage from some other project, but as the entire point. None of that describes a lion, a shark, or a wolf. Those animals live mostly outside our influence, indifferent to us until the moment we show up somewhere they didn't invite us, and even then, most of them would rather retreat than engage. They never got redesigned, never got recruited into a job, and then discarded, never became the target of a species-wide genetic weapon. Their world overlaps with ours occasionally. It was never rebuilt around us the way a pigeon's, a chicken's, or a mosquito's world has been. Even the animals humans fear most, the ones that show up in every nightmare and every horror movie, rank far below these three on any honest accounting of grievance. A shark that bites a swimmer is responding to instinct in unfamiliar water, not settling a score. A wolf avoiding a hiking trail isn't nursing a grudge. It's just doing what its own biology has told it to do for longer than agriculture has existed. Fear runs in one direction with those animals. With a pigeon, a chicken, or a mosquito, The debt runs the other way, and we're the ones who opened the account. The species that would carry real, justified hatred for humanity are the ones we reached into directly at the level of genetics, geography, or population count, and permanently rewrote without ever asking whether they wanted the deal. That's a much shorter, much stranger list than most people expect walking into this question, and none of the three names on it have a single tooth or claw worth worrying about. If animals could talk, the loudest voice in that courtroom would come from something we bred, discarded, or are actively trying to erase. Not from anything with teeth, filing a grievance against the one species on Earth that never had to ask permission before changing what it meant to be them. The animals we fear are the ones with the least reason to hold anything against us. The animals with every reason to hate us are the ones we walk past every single day without a second thought, mistaking domestication, redesign, and erasure for nothing more than background noise. Thanks for watching. If one of these three surprised you, you already know exactly why this question was worth asking in the first place.